I'm thinking, should I talk about the Vatican? Should we talk about the Vatican, everybody? Some interesting stuff about the Vatican that I have been learning from this book. I'm still reading this book, Cult Renaissance Church of Rome by Matthew Hoffman. Very informative book. But Matthew Hoffman, he talks about how, well, he talks about a lot of different things, but it's mainly about the occult. Like the central theme of the book is that the occult infiltrated the Vatican in the Renaissance period. So there was a pope by the name of Julius II. Julius II's real name was Giuliano della Rovere. Rovere was friends with a major occultist by the name of Giles of Viterbo. Giles of Viterbo was very influential in the Vatican. And it says here that it was during Julius's pontificate, so Julius II, a.k.a. Giuliano della Rovere, it was during Julius's pontificate, moreover, that Giles of Viterbo, so often an articulator for the Della Rovere pontiff of the papacy's second mission and destiny, developed a deepening interest in Hebraic studies. So right there in the Vatican, you had this fascination with the Talmud, with the Kabbalah. Earlier, following Anio de Viterbo's lead, Giles of Viterbo had pursued Egyptian lore. Right there, Egyptian paganism. And this goes back to, the papacy of Alexander VI. Alexander VI was very much so interested in the Kabbalah, very much so interested in Egyptian lore. That's why in Alexander VI's papal apartment, there was a painting of Isis next to the Egyptian god Thoth and the prophet Moses next to them, as if the prophet Moses would have approved of Egyptian paganism. Obviously, he didn't. He killed 3,000 people for worshiping a golden calf. And then also Alexander VI was the one who commissioned the creation of the Hall of the Saints, which you can still see today in the Vatican. On the Hall of the Saints, there is portrayed the goddess Isis as the goddess Io in the form of a cow. The cow becomes Isis in Egypt. She is worshipped. She then marries Osiris. Osiris then eventually becomes the bull god Apis. The bull god Apis is embellished with the papal insignia, or with the insignia of the Borgia family, to which Pope Alexander VI belongs, thus portraying Pope Alexander VI as the bull god Apis. Like, it's right there in the Vatican. Blatant paganism, no joke. You can look it up. It is insanely blatant. Insanely blatant paganism, more blatant than Vatican II. Okay, so here you had Julius. He was working with this occultist by the name of Giles of Viterbo. They were connected. It says here that there was a Roman interest in the Kabbalah, and it says here that Roman interest in the Kabbalah did not originate with Giles of Viterbo. Pope Julius II's uncle, Sixtus IV, Pope Sixtus IV, who had made Julius a cardinal, sought to have a Latin translation made of it. To Sixtus's pontificate also belongs the Good Friday 1481 sermon of Flavius Mithridates. So there was this occultist by the name of Mithridates, Flavius Mithridates. He was a Sicilian Jew who had become Catholic. And it says here that this converted Sicilian Jew, who had come to Rome through the patronage of Cardinal Cibo, who would later become Pope Innocent VIII, dazzled his Vatican audience in the course of his 2-hour oration with citations from Latin, Greek, the Hebrew Arcana, and Chaldean. In 1486, at Perugia, this same Mithridates undertook to teach Pico della Mirandola, famous Renaissance occultist, the rudiments of Hebrew, and initiated him into the profundities of esoteric Jewish lore, also known as the Kabbalah, which is Jewish occultism. So Pope Julius II's uncle, Sixtus IV, Pope Sixtus IV, he sought to have a Latin translation of the Kabbalah. So the translation of the Kabbalah into Latin doesn't begin with some riffraff in Italy. It begins with the freaking papacy. That's what people don't understand. This stuff begins with the papacy, guys. And you have all these trads who are like, oh my God, we have to follow the magisterium, man. We have Judaizers and all this stuff. It begins with the papacy. Pope Sixtus IV, right there. And then you have Cardinal Cibo, who would later become Innocent VIII, being a patron for a Jewish occultist by the name of Flavius Mithridates, right there in the Renaissance. So there was this German occultist who became also very influential, Johannes Reuchlin. It says here that Reuchlin's handler in Rome, who personally directed his path up the ladder of the occult Catholic Brotherhood, was Rabbi Obadiah Sforno. From 1482 onward, Reuchlin's patrons, were the Florentine Medici dynasts, among whom was the Medici Pope Leo X. So Leo X was a patron for the spread of this stuff. Right there. Late 15th century. Reuchlin took Giovanni Pico della Mirandola's Catholic Kabbalah to the next level of progression with his seminal works of rabbinic mysticism, De Virbo Mirifico of 1494, which argued, now check this out, this is like straight out of Vatican II, very similar to Vatican II, it's the same thing as Vatican II, which argued that all religions, including Judaic Kabbalism and the paganism of Hermes Trismegistos, which is Egyptian paganism, share with Christianity fundamental sublime truths. Right there, like Vatican II. Oh, Islam, Judaism. Yes, there's overlap between Christianity and Islam, Christianity and Judaism. And De Arte Cabalistica, 1517, his heinous book of black magic. So Johannes Reuchlin wrote this book called De Arte Cabalistica on the art of Kabbalism, published in 1517, and it says his heinous book of black magic, which he dedicated to Leo X, Pope Leo X, right there, connected with the papacy, and which the Pope accepted without disapproval of any kind. And if the Catholic Church if the Inquisition was so regimental, if the Inquisition was so discerning, so vigilant, why didn't they punish Johannes Reuchlin? Right there, writing occult literature and dedicating it to Pope Leo X. So here you have this occultist, Pico della Mirandola, who was very influential, who was spreading Kabbalism, and Pope Alexander VI says, it's okay, his writings are orthodox, not heretical. The decision was reached that Pico had studied thoroughly the books of the Kabbalah and correctly stated that those same books of the Kabbalah, of which there must be approximately 70, demonstrate not only the spirituality of Moses, but the truth of our Christian faith as well. So right there in the late 1400s, you had an ideology in the Vatican that was akin to what you would see in the 1960s with Vatican II, which goes to show that what happened in Vatican II was not really, or should not really have been seen as a surprise. Rather, it should have been seen as the seed that was planted centuries ago, finally germinating and growing. And if you want to be trad, you can simply point, you can say, well, Vatican II is justified. What it says in Vatican II is justified because Alexander VI had no issue with the Kabbalah, and Alexander VI had no issue with an occultist, Pico della Mirandola. And Pico della Mirandola taught that there can be a syncretism between Islam and Christianity. So here you had the syncretists right there in the Renaissance period. So here are the words of Johannes Reuchlin. It says, it is quite obvious from Count Mirandola's Apologia, a book that has been approved by Pope Alexander, that the books of the Kabbalah are not only not malignant, but are also exceedingly helpful to our Christian faith. Pope Sixtus IV ordered them to be translated into our Latin for the use of us Christians. Hence, there is an adequate basis for me to conclude that such Kabbalistic books should not, nor can they, be legally suppressed or burned. And this is why Reuchlin was allowed to spread occultism nonstop without the obstacle, without the hindrance of the Inquisition, because he was given approval. Leo X, Pope Leo X, allowed for Talmudism and Kabbalism to be spread. What allowed for the printing and the dissemination of the Talmud in Europe? What allowed it was the papacy of Leo X. And it says here in November 1513, here's a trad Catholicism here, everybody. Trad Catholicism, right? Based Catholicism, right here. In November 1513, Pope Leo X, beloved of the Jews in Italy, persuaded by his Jewish physician Bonnet de Lattis, ordered all former verdicts to be set aside. The Bishop of Speyer himself decided that Reuchlin's writings were not heretical or false. A humanist party arose throughout Europe in support of Brooklyn, and they went against Pfefferkorn. So Pfefferkorn was at the disadvantage, even though he was the Jewish man who knew about Judaism, who grew up Jewish, who converted to Catholicism. He saw the light. He was trying to expose the evils of Talmudism to the European Catholics. Regardless of all this, the elites, the intelligentsia, they wanted to follow Kabbalism. They wanted to follow the occultism that Pfefferkorn was against. Okay, so there was a financial motivation for some of the people to support Talmudism, and the book gets into this. So very interesting. The bishop who was defending the Talmud, Bishop Uriel, Bishop of Mainz. It says here that Uriel was in debt for a substantial sum of money, 1,500 gulden, to Weisenau. So there was a very famous moneylender, very powerful moneylender. His name was Weisenau, Simon Weisenau. That was his name. And it says here that he was the wealthiest Jew in Frankfurt. And it says here that as Pfefferkorn was working for the gospel and exposing the Talmud in Frankfurt am Main, the Judaic community sent the son of Simon Weisenau, the wealthiest Judaic in Frankfurt, to appeal to the Prince Archbishop Uriel in Aschaffenburg. It didn't hurt the cause of the Judaics that Uriel was in debt for a substantial sum of money, 1,500 gulden, to Weisenau. Consequently, Uriel defended the Talmud against the confiscations by Pfefferkorn. So Pfefferkorn was trying to have the Talmud confiscated and not allowed to be distributed. And the Bishop Uriel, the Bishop of Mainz, went against Pfefferkorn. Uriel, the Bishop of Mainz, he placed his priests under a threat of harsh punishment. The Prince Archbishop commanded all clerics under his jurisdiction to refuse to cooperate with Pfefferkorn's seizure of the Talmud. And this was after the government gave its permission to Pfefferkorn to confiscate the Talmud. The Bishop of Mainz told his priests, do not cooperate with the government. Do not cooperate with any sort of attempt by the Inquisition to seize the Talmud. So here's another example of there being a financial incentive behind protecting the Talmud. It says here that Maximilian accepted bribes from Jonathan Levi Zeon, one of the leaders of the Frankfurt Talmudists. Maximilian's military ally, Duke Erich of Braunschweig, was in heavy debt, 5,400 gulden, to Eitzing Bopfingen, a Judaic loan shark in Frankfurt. In return for Maximilian halting the confiscation of the Talmud, in May 1511, Bopfingen promised to lift the interest on the Duke's debt for 3 years. So basically you had these money lenders. They said, okay, don't confiscate the Talmud, don't oppress the printing and the spread of the Talmud. We will be easy on you with the debt, etc., etc. The Talmud was dead in Europe. It was dead. There was a few copies of the Talmud here and there. They were found in libraries. You really had to go out of your way to search them out. It wasn't being printed. It wasn't being distributed. And the papacy gives its blessing to the printing and distribution of the Talmud. It goes back to the papacy. And it goes back to this guy named Daniel Bomberg. He was a major publisher. The major printer, the owner of this major printing company, his name was Daniel Bomberg. He had a partner by the name of a business partner by the name of Felix Pratensis. He was a Jewish guy who converted to Catholicism. His real name was Father Felice de Prato. De Prato had been the handler of the youthful Giles of Viterbo, who was an occultist. So here you have the occult network. Giles of Viterbo is connected with Felice de Prato. Prato becomes the business partner of Bomberg, Daniel Bomberg, and together they began the publication and the printing of the Talmud in Europe. And this printing of the Talmud would be approved by the papacy of Pope Leo X. And very interestingly enough, Giles of Viterbo would later be made a cardinal by the very Pope Leo X in 1517. To print Hebrew books, Jews depended heavily on Venetian Christian printers for print editions of foundational rabbinic texts. One might claim that these Christian printers have taught Torah, and without them, Heaven forbid the Torah would have already been forgotten from Israel, and thus it is appropriate to assist this mission so that there will be no ruin. The papacy of Pope Leo X gave the approval to the printing of the Talmud, and there you have it. It goes right up to the papacy. Right there in the Vatican in the Renaissance period.